So
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen. Sorry if you can see double faces there for a minute. And there we go. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. All right. So again, I'm Alli Lewis. I'm coordinator for the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership. So today we're going to dive into all aspects of the partnership, who's involved and how folks work together. So the overall purpose and mission of the Vermont Agricultural Water Quality Partnership is to improve agricultural water quality in Vermont by coordinating all of the partners in efforts to provide education, technical, and financial assistance to the agricultural community. And within this partnership, we have three overarching goals, of course, to improve water quality and wildlife habitat on all engaged farmland owner and operators' properties, delivering technical and financial assistance in the most effective and efficient manner, and providing the best service experience possible for the landowner. So I'll talk a bit about the history of the partnership, and we'll go a ways back so you can see the process of how we've moved along in water quality in Vermont. So way back in 1990, there was the development and signing of the Lake Champlain Special Designation Act. So this provided the opportunity for Lake Champlain to be held to a standard for water quality that would allow them targeted support from partners and the ability to access financial resources, and really brought our partnership together in its very baby stages. Before this whole partnership could really be envisioned, there was like the seeds of the partnership had begun with the groups that were working on water quality in Vermont. And actually this Lake Champlain Special Designation Act helped to foster some new partnerships and partners in coming together. So I'll talk more about that. But for example, the Fish and Wildlife Service, this act specifically helped them to establish their Lake Champlain focused office in Vermont and priorities for the state of Vermont. So it has effects all the way down the line. Also in 1991, the basin planning coordination began. So Department of Environmental Conservation has a series of basin plans based on groupings of sub-watersheds in Vermont. So for example, there's a basin plan for the Memphremagog Lake watershed, the portion that's in Vermont. There is a basin plan for the upper reaches of Lake Champlain. So on the DEC website, and I'm happy to send a follow-up map, there is a visual of all the different sections of basins. And there's a basin planner assigned to every single basin who is responsible for assisting to coordinate efforts within the basin for achievements that are outlined in the plan. And these basin plans for these specific sub-watersheds or pairings of sub-watersheds are updated every 5 years. So while Vermont has this high level vision and mission for water quality, and it has some big lakes like the Memphremagog watershed, the Lake Champlain watershed, the Connecticut River watershed, the Hudson River watershed. Those are really big chunks. And so this basin planning coordination broke down those bigger watershed groupings into smaller sections that geographically and topographically made sense. So the basin planning process is not DEC alone. It's actually comprised of input from all of the partners within the Ag Water Quality Partnership, but then also partners and organizations beyond that, because basin planning doesn't only focus on agriculture, it also focuses on other sections and sectors like stormwater master planning, roads, that sort of thing. So that was a huge step after the Lake Champlain Special Designation Act in collaboration and moving Vermont forward in planning for water quality improvements across all sectors. And then Vermont was going along. They had a total maximum daily load plan for Lake Champlain that they were making efforts towards, but then there was a lawsuit and EPA disapproved the 2002 TMDL. So Vermont had previously been operating under trying to make achievements that were for phosphorus reduction that were outlined in this TMDL that was signed in 2002. But then a group sued and they revisited that TMDL and realized that, you know what, the reductions that are outlined in this really aren't going to be enough for us to save the lake. And so they rescinded the 2002 TMDL and started working towards the new TMDL that we have today. So, and that took many years to revisit that and be writing that with EPA and getting that through the signature process. So in the meantime, the partners realized, and we're going to go through all the partners in a bit, the partners realized we all have different rules and regulations on how we communicate, and we can't all speak to each other in the same way. And how are we going to collaborate and make these improvements for water quality and do the work that we need to do if we can't speak to each other? And so the initial partnership MOU was signed. So the partners and members of the partnership, I'm going to go through all of them, but they were now able to speak to each other about different projects they're working on, their priorities. There are some, how do I say, there's some like specifications around regulatory, non-regulatory. So some information is still not really able to be shared because it is a regulatory process, such as for Agency of Ag or DEC. If it's part of a regulatory complaint or file that they're working on, they may not be able to share that. But or a non-regulatory group may not be able to, or may not share something with a regulatory group that they wouldn't want to get somebody they're working with in trouble. There's kind of these fine lines, which I'll talk about, but basically the MOU allowed people to talk to each other for the most part. And there are some nuances there regarding making sure that there's good QA, QC around regulatory or non-regulatory information. So, and also regarding personally identifiable information, that was a big piece of this. You know, when farmers and agricultural producers are working through ag water quality issues that they have with groups that are providing funding or technical assistance, we want to make sure that their information remains private and that the public can't see it. So it really outlines a lot of privacy and communication rules, and so it was a big step in the right direction. And then I touched upon this before, Amir, you were able to join, but previously the Agency of Ag, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the Agency of Ag had accepted agricultural practices, but they didn't go far enough. And so they went through the rulemaking process to revise them and have them become required agricultural practices. And there was a tremendous amount of rulemaking, outreach, and education around this. So I would think it's virtually impossible for any agricultural producer in the state of Vermont today to not have heard of the required agricultural practices. And it also made significant changes to farm size specifications. So previously, under the accepted ag practices, all farm types, any size, fell under the jurisdiction of the Agency of Ag and DEC in some part, depending on if the nature of a violation, if it was a direct discharge. I'll talk more about this later. And then with these new required ag practices, some of the very, very small ag operations like backyard farming kind of deal now falls under the jurisdiction mainly of municipalities. So if somebody has an issue with somebody's 6 chickens, for example, they would first contact the town or the municipality. And also with these new required ag practices, there was the separation of the MFO, medium farm operation and large farm operation programs. Previously, there was a small farm operation program, and then medium and large farm work was kind of all mixed together. And so that was separated into two specific teams within the Agency of Ag. So there's a small farm coordination program, and now there's the medium and large farm coordination program. So I definitely recommend, as a reading source coming out of this training, to go through the required ag practices. On the Agency of Ag website, there are some really great resources and visuals to highlight key rules or how to navigate the process of whose jurisdiction does this fall under? Is this something for the municipality? Am I a small farm? Am I a medium large farm? That sort of thing. So that was huge, and there was years of work on that, and that was a huge benefit for the state to have those new rules in place. And then the MOU of communication, which I talked about before, came up and was renewed and signed again, which is currently what we're operating under. The Memorandum of Understanding within this Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership is the one that was signed in 2018. And after that was signed, we dove right into strategic planning for the partnership. And so I'm going to walk us through what our strategic plan is, but a strategic plan was developed and began. And so that is where we're at, which is, 1990 to today. That's a broad sweep of the efforts in the ag sector. Okay, so the partnership has a collaborative structure, and there's a number of committees and teams that are all working collaboratively to move our strategic plan forward. So there's the leadership team, which, if you're envisioning leadership, you can think about commissioners and secretaries of our partners and organizations. So Vicki Drew, she's the state conservationist for NRCS. Anson Tebbets, he is the head of Agency of Ag, the commissioner for DC. That's really who would be on the leadership team. And they help to provide policy direction that is requested by the steering committee. And I'm going to talk about the steering committee. But they're the ones who are listed on the MOU, and they gather once a year. We had a gathering with them last January, which was really wonderful. It was a facilitated event. It was very interactive, talking about coordinated messaging and the vision for the partnership and how to engage the ag community and the public. So it was very productive when we do get together with them. And then below that is the steering committee, which meets quarterly. And the steering committee usually includes some leadership folks, and then they also include upper level management and point people from the partners. And so that would include, for example, from the groups that you're a part of, Vicki Drew from NRCS, Joe Buford from NRCS, Amy Overstreet from NRCS, John Thurgood, they're usually on. From Agency of Ag, it's usually Laura DePietro, Ryan Patch, Nina Gage, Sonia Howlett. From VACD, Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, there's usually Jill Arache and Jeff Farber and myself. There's usually several folks from UVM Extension. Dan Lerner is usually on. Sometimes leadership from UVM Extension engages. Right now they're in a place of transition, so we haven't had the opportunity to welcome the new leadership at UVM yet. There's also VHCB, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, usually Nancy Everhart or Gus Seelig attends. Eileen and Wendy Houston Anderson from, Wendy Houston from Farm Service Agency, which works collaboratively with NRCS and other partners. I'll give more detail about each of these groups. Usually folks from Fish and Wildlife Service, Chris Smith. Department of Environmental Conservation, definitely Marley Roop, and sometimes Neil Kamen, and other staff come as well. So it's a really big group. We usually have about 20 to 25 people that join the steering committee quarterly, and really we dive into the work of the partnership. And so we'll be looking at the strategic plan, projects that we're collaboratively coordinating on, engaging grant programs and technical assistance programs, working to collaboratively secure more funding for the state of Vermont, really deep diving into the work that all of the partners are doing. And then there's myself, the coordinator, and my main role is to just bring folks together, make sure that communication is happening across the partners, that they're able to collaborate on the objectives that are part of the strategic plan that we'll dive into, maintaining the SharePoint site, I'll talk about that, the calendar, developing materials for the partnership, really just helping to move things along as best I can and support the people that are doing the great work within the partnership. And technically, I work for VAWQP, but really I serve the partnership in my role. Then there are the regional teams, which these are just getting going. So in the past, well, that's sort of. So in the past, there's been regional teams that had met. So there would be a Connecticut River team. There's the Memph Ag Partners Group, which continues to meet, has been very successful in continuing to meet. With the help of Sarah Damsel, who is the district manager for Orleans County, and then there are other groups who have met regularly in the past with varied success. But what we have found in the partnership as a need is to provide support for folks to be able to get these groups together, so these regional teams can have coordination and continued momentum. And so I'm working with some folks at Agency of Ag and VACD and NRCS to put out a proposal for support. So we'll be seeking, we'll be putting out a request for proposals for folks who are interested in receiving funds to be regional coordinators, so we can support these regional teams. So that is something that has happened with some success in the past, depending on the regions, but that we're providing specific funding for to make sure that it's successful across the state. And then there are various subcommittees that are working on the specific objectives that I'm going to talk about in the strategic plan, the specific projects. And one of those subcommittees that we pull out because they've been really strong all along is the communications team. So the communications team, we meet monthly. We put out the newsletter. We work to collaboratively share information from the different groups across the partnership, put together this webinar series, help to facilitate the leadership in releasing the press release that went out in August to celebrate Water Quality Month. So those are the folks that are collaborating within this partnership and kind of the groupings of them. So this is an example of who is on for the MOU. It's slightly outdated because some of these leadership staff have transferred on, so we need to update this. But the MOU includes USDA NRCS, Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, Agency of Ag, Fish and Wildlife Service, UVM Extension, USDA Farm Service Agency, the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, the Basin Program, and Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And these are the folks that are in the MOU, but this isn't to say these are the only folks operating within the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership. We definitely have other partners involved. For example, the Vermont Land Trust works very collaboratively with all of these partners on their projects as well. So actually, I'm going to talk about these folks. We're going to go back. Oh. Okay. So let's just walk through each of these partners and just kind of a high-level overview of what each of them do. So USDA NRCS, they are a federal organization. They are non-regulatory. So they have a lot of different programs, but you can think of, I like to think about it as EQIP and WRE and CIP. So those are a lot of acronyms. So there's the EQIP program, which basically is the offers agricultural practices for water quality improvement or forestry practices for either forest stand or water quality conservation improvement. So an example of an ag practice could be anything from a laneway improvement, barnyard improvement, roof runoff capture, redirection, all sorts of things. And then for forestry, on the forestry end, There's water quality based practices like forest road improvement or stream crossings, that sort of thing. But then there's also timber stand improvement practices like apple tree release and some other things like that. And I know that they have provided relief for forest stand managers in times of environmental issues, such as we had like a microburst several years ago, and a whole bunch of maple sugar operators had a whole bunch of trees that went down, and it was a real issue. And so they provided emergency support to that. So maple sugar operators fall under, even though they're on forest land, they're technically considered an ag practice. So that goes between water quality related work and conservation related work. Then there's also the ACEP program, which is Ag Conservation Easement Program, and this is still within NRCS. And so I think about that. I have this whole chart. Maybe I should send you. I have this whole visual chart. I'll try and get it from DEC, but it's this huge thing that you print on a plotter that explains NRCS's programs and start to finish, and it's, I think, really helpful. But it explains that the Ag Conservation Easement Program really has two sectors. There's the wetlands reserve easements. Jim Eikenberry is the lead for that program with NRCS, and so that program is absolutely focused on taking a chunk of land that was prior wetland or has been denuded wetland and protecting it, putting it into an easement so that it's for perpetuity. It cannot be converted or anything like that. And then once it's in the easement, restoring it to be a functioning wetland. And they have had tremendous success in the state of Vermont in protecting and improving huge blocks of wetlands, especially down in southern central Vermont. They've had really great success. I'll try and find, I think I'm just gonna bag this presentation and do it another time since I'm thinking of all these things, but I'm writing it out that I'm gonna get you guys the flow chart of programs, and also I'm gonna get you the, there's this really awesome map that I'd love you to see of wetland success of the Otter Creek watershed. And we've been able to document how those projects have helped us in high storm events. So for example, you can compare from Irene the effects of Rutland and the effects of Middlebury in water surge after the floods came, and where there were wetlands, it was like significantly less. So I'll try and get you the info on that too, because those are some really great success stories about these programs that I think will hone it in for you. And then I'm also going to get you the map of the basin planning regions. Okay. So anyway, so the wetlands work, ACEP WRE, they usually work collaboratively with folks from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Chris Smith and Ryan Crean and Jim Eikenberry usually work together on those projects. And then also still in the Ag Conservation Easement Program, there's the ALE Ag Land Easement sector. And so this is different than the wetlands work. There are still easements in perpetuity, meaning that once the land's protected, it can't be converted into like housing or anything like that. And those projects work collaboratively with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the Vermont Land Trust to put in place. And those also include water quality improvement and conservation work once they're signed, or sometimes before they're signed. So for example, the CREP program that I mentioned earlier, Conservation Reserve Easement Program, it's a buffer planting program. That will usually go in place right before an easement is signed, because there's all these rules about order and whatnot. And so this is a really good example of how the partnership works together. So in the context of the Lake Champlain RCPP project, which had funding for ag land easements, all of our partners within the partnership would work together to do an ag land easement. So for example, NRCS would fund the ag land easement from their standpoint. They receive an application from Vermont Housing Conservation Board with the project details, and the Vermont Land Trust has worked collaboratively with the landowner to get them to that point. So they work with landowners, they bring applications to Vermont Housing Conservation Board. The Vermont Housing Conservation Board vets them and engages their own steering committee, which includes Agency of Ag members, DEC members, and others within the partnership and beyond, to vet these projects and select the ones that'll move forward to be proposed to NRCS. And so NRCS receives all these proposals. They have RCPP funds, they have regular EQIP funds, regular ASEP funds. And so they'll figure out what funding pot to fund these with, and then also provide technical support along the way. So it's very nuanced. So these types of projects, all of the partners are working together at various levels to get the work done. So for example, that's the process for getting an ag land easement in for funding. But then there's all this other work that's happening on the water quality conservation front. So if they need buffers, or they need a widened buffer or a buffer planting, they're going to be working with Agency of Ag staff, NRCS staff, potentially DEC staff. The Agency of Ag program has somebody on staff, Ben Gabos, who works with the CREP program. So he's going to be working with the landowner to get the proposal all put together to get this buffer project in, which is going to go through Agency of Ag and Farm Service Agency. And so that's going to go in. They might be working with DEC or Agency of Ag and or NRCS to do some farm improvements, like maybe they need to do a laneway, or maybe there's a troublesome manure pit that needs to be removed, etc. So they're going to be looking to secure funding from NRCS, what they can give, potentially combining with Agency of Ag, their best management practice program, what they could provide, potentially engaging with the Vermont Housing Vermont Housing Board, VHCB's Farm Viability or Water Quality Improvement Grant Program, to really assist the farmer in getting as much technical and financial support as they can to get through this process. So oftentimes easements take a very long time, but are a beautiful example of the nuances and layers of how the partners work together on these types of water quality projects. So that's an example for the Ag Land Easement Program. So still under NRCS, there's also the Conservation Initiative Program, CIP, which is a newer program and is really focused on, once you've done all of your water quality work for your land, where there's a resource concern and you've met it and you've addressed it, but you still want to go above and beyond, you're an environmentalist, you want to be doing good, you can apply for funding and technical assistance through NRCS to do more. And CIP is different in that it's a suite of practices. So in EQIP, they're really focused on addressing a resource concern, and your contract for the work that you're going to do as a farmer could include one practice. Okay, I'm going to do this laneway, or it could include a whole farm suite of practices. And the CIP program, which is this newer program going above and beyond, you've already met all of your resource concerns. This is a suite of practices. So I believe it's 3 to 5 practices. There's a length of time for you to complete them. And it's just kind of a different format for getting these practices on the ground. But that could include more buffer planting, pollinator planting, etc. So there's a number of ways that farmers can get funding and get technical assistance through NRCS to do practices that are either required of them as an ag producer, or because they are an environmental steward, they want to do on their own. And it's not just for farmers. Anybody who is a land manager or operator can apply. So for instance, some farms, the owner is the operator. In other farms, the person operating is not the landowner. It might be somebody who's renting the farm to them. And so NRCS provides the opportunity for work to happen that needs to happen for water quality, despite if you own the land or you don't own the land, and it's simply just getting permission from the landowner. Okay, that's the first one checked off. Okay, and so next is the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. And so there's the Vermont Association of
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I got a call about my mattress, so I've got to head out right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll re-record this and I will send it to you.
Because I am actually, this is great. I'm getting a lot out of this. I need a lot of this information, so I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to get the recording of it.
Okay, awesome. Well,
okay.
Best of luck with your move, and thanks for joining as much as you could.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right, VACD. Okay, so I would like to specify the VACD listed in this actually represents the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts as the nonprofit that it is, as well as the districts, which technically are different, but really fall under this umbrella of natural resource conservation districts for the state of Vermont. So VACD has some staff, Jill Rache is the executive director, to do specific projects. For example, there's a communications director, there's a communications staff, grants management staff, there's myself, there are some staff working specifically on like our CPP, Regional Conservation Partnership Program projects as conservation planners, but it's limited. There's not that many staff. But then there are the individual districts. So there's, and this is really based on watershed regions in Vermont and very much is aligned with the tactical basin planning regions that I mentioned before that DEC has. So for example, the Memphremagog area is the Orleans County Natural Resource Conservation District, and Sarah Damsel is the district manager, and she has staff and has had EcoAmericorps in the past that work for her district. And districts are grant funded, and so they receive a small amount of money every year from the national conservation districts, and just to fund, it's basically a little bit of seed money to fund the district managers enough time to secure grants for the work that they do. So every district is different because they're really led by the interest of the board, the community, and what grants they can secure. So for example, in Orleans County Conservation District, there's a plant sale every year. That's a big thing for the community. They have the Memphremagog Regional Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP. It was a 5-year program. They're applying to get another 5 years of funding. There's also other grants that they've received to do support, providing technical assistance and ag education to farmers. They support the farming community by assisting them in soil samplings so that they can write their nutrient management plan. So some districts fall very much in line with those interests, and some districts have other interests. Some districts may be more interested in stormwater work because districts aren't solely focused on ag, or they may also be focused on dam removal work, working closely with Department of Environmental Conservation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So every district is different, but they are all engaged in ag water quality work in Vermont to some extent. And so when VACD is listed in the strategic plan for the partnership, we mean the districts and we mean the nonprofit VACD. So then there's the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets. Oh, I meant to mention the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts is a nonprofit and they're non-regulatory. So they're not going to move a producer through a fining process or anything like that. They solely are non-regulatory. So then there's the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets, And they are both regulatory and non-regulatory, and they have a number of farm programs. And I know the people I'm talking to are from Agency of Ag, so I apologize, but maybe there'll be something new in here for you. So, of course, they hold the required ag practices, as well as the farm programs, the small farm program, the medium and large farm program, and the responsibility for ensuring that ag producers are following the required ag practices and enforcing on them. They have a whole enforcement matrix, which is really great. They've come a long way from the accepted ag practices to now with the required ag practices, and ensuring consistency and great documentation across the board with supporting farmers through that process. And when I say supporting farmers through that process, I really mean that. It's everybody's goal in Vermont to help a producer come into compliance as best they can without fining them or without regulating them. So first and foremost, the partners are going to try and help a producer who has an issue with getting financial and technical assistance to fix the problem. And really, it takes a lot to reach the point where it's time for enforcement. And so Agency of Ag is not only regulatory, but they also support farmers. So they have a number of programs to do that, including the BMP program, where the engineers provide support. There's financial assistance, as well as engineering and technical support to help producers do smaller scale fixes compared to USDA NRCS on their farm. And it's a really nice option because sometimes with the our federal partners like NRCS, they have standards that they need to meet that may not be the common sense solution for water quality for the specific farm. So going with Agency of Ag, who are still able to fix the problem, but may have a little bit more flexibility on the types of practices they use, is sometimes a more cost-effective fit for producers. And very often, Agency of Ag and NRCS work together in providing technical and financial assistance to producers to make sure that they are getting the best solution for the problems that they have, that's cost-effective and works for the producer. So other programs that go in line with that are cover cropping support. So for example, if they have reached their farm bill limit of funding, or they aren't going to get funded for cover crop with NRCS, they can go to Agency of Ag and they'll support them in getting some cover crop funds. They've also provided assistance for getting equipment for no-till drills and tracking and stuff like that in the past. So that's really the water quality and granting type program at Agency of Ag. And then there's also the Ag Dev team, Ag Development, and they're focused on providing support to farm businesses, providing education and outreach, promoting farming and agriculture in Vermont, assisting with grants to get local products to schools. They're really big on that and have had a lot of success there. And then there's also the dairy inspectors, who they do their inspections separately from the water quality division and the work that goes around required ag practices. So they're really focused on cleanliness and animal health and all that stuff. There's also the pesticide and herbicide division within Agency of Ag, and Agency of Ag also historically and still does a fair amount of water quality sampling on ag land. So nitrates, phosphorus, that sort of thing, pesticide, herbicide. Okay, and then next, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So these guys are federal, but there is a state office. So as I mentioned before, the Lake Champlain Special Delegation Act, that helped to establish the Lake Champlain office. And their focus is to protect, restore, and manage fish and wildlife, their habitats in the Lake Champlain, Connecticut River, and Hudson River Basin, as well as just broadly across Vermont, but they do have priority focuses in those three watersheds. They're focused on restoring healthy aquatic habitat, supporting a healthy intersection between agricultural land management and fish and wildlife habitat. They also promote aquatic connectivity with supporting dam removals and increasing flood resiliency. And then they also assess and control sea lamprey populations in Vermont, and they assess other fish populations and manage hatcheries. So that's what they're focused on. And a lot of the work that they do within the partnership is focused on easements and wetland restoration. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Okay, next is UVM extension. So the purpose of UVM extension is to cultivate healthy communities, provide research, technical assistance, education and outreach for the agricultural community, and increase ag business profitability, support forest and farm stewardship safety, encourage expanded markets for local food products, and facilitate farm transfers. So there are a lot of UVM extension staff that are engaged in working within the partnership. So there's like Heather Darby, Jeff Sanders, Kirsten Workman, that team in the extension office that not only leads research for the ag sector, but also provides technical support, soil sampling, field management, helps farmers to get their nutrient management plans by hosting and teaching the NMP development class, helping farmers to take their soil samples, really working collaboratively to share information within the partnership and ensure that we're all on the same page with the latest information pertaining to Vermont. Joshua Faulkner is a professor at UVM, and he leads studies related to soil health and phosphorus, and they've been doing a lot of great work pertaining to cover crop and no-till versus till and those different studies. They also have, when I spoke to increasing ag business profitability, they also have farm viability staff to support producers in a suite of ways, from just coming in for a consultation related to their business viability to helping them along the path to developing a business management plan for viability. So there are a lot of different staff in UVM providing support in a variety of ways. And then next on the list, we have FSA. So USDA FSA is another federal group, and they provide support they have a number of loan programs for producers. They affiliate with groups like the Yankee Farm Credit and folks like that to help producers fund the work that they need to do for their operations, both from a viability standpoint and also from a water quality standpoint. So when farmers are receiving financial services from any of our partners providing them, Agency of Ag, NRCS, they need to pay for everything they do upfront, and they will get compensated once they can demonstrate that their project has been done and been done to the appropriate standards specified by the organization providing that assistance. And so when a farm has a lot to do and they cap out their farm bill, they could have $550, $600 plus $1,000 that they need to finance. And so FSA is a huge partner in supporting them to get that line of credit. They also are involved with tracking land use and land control. And so if you are a producer going in to apply for practice with NRCS, you are also going to need to visit FSA to specify the tract and fields that you are going to be putting these practices on and make sure that the information in their system is accurate. And they also provide support to the CREP program, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. That's that buffer program that I was mentioning that has to go in before easements can go in, or sometimes it goes in without an easement. So the CREP program specifically, if you're not familiar, is a land rental program. And so if a landowner signs up for CREP, they're going to work with Ben Gagos from the Agency of Ag, and they're going to lay out a a buffer area, no touch buffer area that is going to be rented for, I think it's 8 to 10 years. I can't remember the contract length, but and it's going to include plantings, and it may include a fence if there's livestock, it may not. But through that program, the cost of the project is going to be mostly paid for, and then they will also get a rental rate payment every year until that expires. Some landowners decide to continue to re-enroll, and we consider that a great success. Some landowners choose not to, and that's disappointing. But along the way, they will need to work with FSA, because Agency of Ag helps funnel projects through to FSA for the CREP program. And something interesting that may be applicable to the work you both are doing, or would be a good thing to know about, is that there was a standstill with the PrEP program for a while, because in the latest Farm Bill, they mentioned that the CREP program couldn't be used in places where there was already a requirement for there to be a buffer. And they didn't understand the difference for Vermont, in that the required agricultural practices say that there's a no-touch buffer for these specifications, but it could be grassed, versus in the CREP program, there's going to be solid trees, there may be exclusion fencing if there's livestock. It's really a practice at a higher standard, or a different standard than just mainly a no-touch grass buffer. And so many of the partners within the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership have been working for a long time to try and get a waiver for that, because there are many other states that have similar rules, but we're still able to move forward with their CREP program. And so just recently, there's been success in that. This summer, 3 projects were sent through FSA to Washington with the request for a waiver, and it was granted. So CREP can move forward on those projects. And that's huge, because not only is it a huge benefit to have this CREP project, but it was necessary for those lands because they were going through an ag land easement, or they are going through an ag land easement. And the CREP project has to happen before the easement can close. And, you know, in this realm of financial and technical assistance, on the financial end, there's always a timeline for the obligated money and how long it's viable, or before it could potentially be taken back. So for example, if these projects were ag land easements from the last Farm Bill, and this is the last year of the Farm Bill, they may need to be used within a shorter timeline, versus if it was the beginning of a Farm Bill and there was plenty of NRCS money and plenty of time. So on that front, that was a huge win, and FSA did a lot of work to help us to get that information down to Washington and go to bat for us. So that's been really great. And that in the work of ag water quality in Vermont is like a very relatable and understandable thing that FSA does. And so then moving on, we have Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. So they're under the umbrella of the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. And DEC does a number of things. They do a lot of different things. So as we've talked about, they have the basin planning program and efforts. They also do a number of other things, like they have the Lakes and Ponds program. They have the wetlands program, which is really responsible for ensuring compliance with wetland rules and educating Vermonters about that. They have permitting, they have a stormwater division. They have a lot of different things. And they also provide support to ag producers in a number of sectors. So Marley Roop is the Ag Water Quality Section Chief with DEC. And she's the lead on the Lake Champlain RCPP, and they are getting a renewal for that, which is awesome. So great. It's going to be a little bit different than the previous one. And she works closely with the other partners to provide support, communicate, share what DEC is doing, help to share about the Lake Champlain RCPP, and provide collaboration on a number of efforts. So the Lake Champlain RCPP included ag water quality practices forestry water quality practices, wetlands work, or wetlands conservation easements and improvements, ag land easements and improvements. So DEC was a strong partner in all of that work for the partnership. And they also have a CAFO program, so confined animal feeding operation. So Vermont does not have any certified confined animal feeding operations. All of our farms meet the specifications of medium and large farms for relatable farm size to CAFO. So New York State, their Department of Environmental Conservation does all the regulatory work for farmland, and their designation for farm size is specified by CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, and the parameters that go with that. And part of the TMDL with EPA is that Vermont and New York collaborate, of course, because we share the same watershed for Lake Champlain, but also that there will be collaborative farm visits every year with EPA and DEC and Agency of Ag. And so DEC and Agency of Ag collaborate regulatorily in that way. And also in that DEC is responsible for direct discharge regulation. So for example, a indirect discharge might be that let's see, there's an unknown pipe that comes out of a barn, and no, that's not very good. There is a roof runoff that is going onto a barnyard that is then making its way over some grass and whatnot, and eventually goes to a stream or something like that. Like, it's not a pipe to a river or a pipe to a ditch or something, or a tile to a ditch or something like that. And so a direct discharge is very specific. There's a manure pit that is overtopped, and it is a flowing lava path of manure straight to a stream. That would be a very clear example of a direct discharge. And so DEC and their program for CAFO would be responsible for moving that through in collaboration with Agency of Ag for regulation and enforcement, potentially. And then Agency of Ag is responsible for everything else regulatory. So they're mainly the ones that are working directly with farmers on their inspections and that sort of thing, and they communicate with DEC as needed. So that's DEC in a nutshell related to ag. Then there is the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And so, hang on just a sec here. So the Lake Champlain Basin Program is receives federal funds and funds from other sources. They have a number of priorities, mainly to help support water quality, conservation, and cultural heritage in the Lake Champlain Basin. So they have funding that they give out grants, they receive grants for water quality work, for coordination of ag efforts. They are providing support to the partnership for the work that they're doing. They also have their Lake Champlain Basin Cultural Heritage support grants that they provide to different groups. For example, the Indigenous community of Vermont, they would be eligible to receive cultural heritage grants potentially, or apply for them from Lake Champlain Basin Program. They manage the TAC, which is a group that meets quarterly, I believe, and includes many of the leads from the partnership, and it's focused on TMDL implementation and how we're doing on progress, what studies are relevant that are happening in Vermont. They work very closely with UVM and the other partners to do that work. Matt Vaughn is a coordinator for Lake Champlain Basin Program, and he is a great resource. He is coming up in next week, a week and a half, for our next webinar, I believe, and he's going to be talking all about the Lake Champlain Basin Program, the recent studies that they're involved with, and their recent efforts. And so I definitely recommend doing that. I think it's October 21st, but it was on the webinar listing. And then finally in the list here, which is not all inclusive of the partners we work with, there's the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So they receive funding from the state of Vermont as designated in the budget from the legislature and other sources to do what they do. And so they help, as I mentioned before, with ag land easements. They also have a farm viability program. So they help farmers and ag business managers to develop viability plans and business plans and implement them. They also have a number of funding programs themselves, including, farm viability grants and water quality grants. I believe up to $40,000 for the water quality grants. And so that is another resource for financial support. So if there's an agricultural producer who has a water quality project that they want to do and they're trying to receive as much funding as they can from these various sources, and say maybe they've reached their farm bill cap, so they're not going to be receiving as much from NRCS. They can also apply to, say it's a barnyard related practice. They're going to apply to NRCS and hopefully get funded with them. They're going to provide a certain amount of coverage. Then they can also apply to the Agency of Ag, who can help bump that up to a certain amount of coverage or provide supplemental support. And then they can also apply to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board Water Quality Grant Program and get up to, I believe, $40,000. And so a producer can't receive more than 90% cost share for a project, but for a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 project, to get 90% cost share is huge. And of course, they would very likely be working with FSA, Farm Service Agency, to assist in getting a line of credit for them to cover the costs before they're reimbursed, because all of these are reimbursement programs. But that's an example of what VHCB does. And if there are any questions on that part, we should probably take a pause and go through those before we move ahead to dive into the strategic plan. Okay. All right, moving right along. So let's work through the strategic plan. I'm just looking at the time. Oh, we're over on time. Are you guys okay if I keep going for a bit?
I'm fine.
Okay, I'll try and breeze through this. Looks like this is a longer than 1 hour training. Good to know. I've given this a number of times, but have made it less. But since you guys are really engaging with folks doing this work, I wanted to give you a deep dive. But all right, so we've talked about the purpose and mission and the goals of the strategic plan for the partnership. But these are the 6 objectives that are outlined in the strategic plan. And there are champions or points for each of these. It doesn't mean that these are the folks that are responsible for doing all the work. They're just the point of communication that I can assist getting these projects along. So building stronger collaboration, connecting and coordinating research and learning across the partnership and beyond the partnership, utilizing research and learning to evaluate and adjust and innovate specific practices and tools. For example, do we need to make any adjustments for our cover cropping practice based on the trials that we've seen from UVM? Ensuring training of staff across partner organizations, creating consistent, coherent, and meaningful messages for partner staff, farmers, and the public, and aligning tactical basin planning with prioritization efforts so that we can ensure that we're all jointly targeting watershed strategies for the best reductions so we can achieve our TNDL goals. Excuse me. So we have a website. It's just one page. We figure public facing, we want to keep it as simple and digestible as possible. But the strategic plan's on there, our 2019 annual report, a list of the partner with links to their websites, and a short video about the partnership is available. It's vtagcleanwater.org. We have a SharePoint site, which I will ask that you guys get access to. And so it's been a slow add-on for staff to get on to the SharePoint site, partly due to COVID and the workload that put on our partner UVM, who's managing this, and all the adjustments they had to make with transitioning everybody to remote learning and remote work. Their tech staff just didn't have time to add 300 people to the SharePoint, who all need usernames and passwords. But a number of folks, including the steering committee and the communications team, are all using the SharePoint site pretty regularly. There's a calendar that the vision is eventually will be a place to house all events and trainings and related work that the partnership should be aware of, so folks can check that and see what's coming up. And then the partner database went live, which was huge. This is a place for non-regulatory staff to all share information about the projects they're working on for farmers, and instead of partners not having the opportunity because they're busy or not being aware of what other folks are doing, and it resulting in people not knowing who's on farms, working on farms, and what projects, and then multiple people going to farms, and farmers, of course, being like, why aren't you talking to each other? And I'm confused. I thought you were here the other day, or aren't you regulatory or non-regulatory? So the partner database was developed and launched so that all of the non-regulatory partners can place information here about, I went to the farm, I talked to them about the CREP program, here's where we're thinking of putting the buffer, and then NRCS, well, NRCS will get in here at some point, but, and then other folks being able to engage, and then you can go in and see who else has been on the farm. You can, as the person working with a producer, reach out to the partner and collaborate and have it be a better experience for the producer, which is one of our goals, is having the best experience possible for those engaging in the programs. So that's been great. Training, the annual meeting got postponed because of COVID, but the vision was that there's new employee training there. We're doing this. This is a soft launch and clearly needs to be longer. And I have a bunch of resources I'm going to send you guys. So thank you for sort of being the guinea pigs. It wasn't my plan, but that's kind of how it worked out. We also the rest of this webinar series is really getting at this training objective of updating partners about what specific groups have been doing, and also provide some training related to specific topics such as soils, wetlands messaging, RCPP, what's coming next, Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge, etc. And then continuous improvement on the training front and what we need. Also, we have the newsletter, which is one of my favorite things about the partnership. If you have not received the newsletter, please send me an email and let me know, because I will add you to it. But it had been coming out monthly. We're transitioning to quarterly, but we're also going to be sending a FYI, these are the things that are coming up this month, monthly. So that would be trainings or meetings you might want to know about, webinar opportunities, etc., or like due dates for funding applications, that sort of thing. So coming up, we're continuing to evolve in our communications tools with, as I said, adjustments to the newsletter and figuring out how else we're going to get stuff out to folks. I do recommend that you complete the survey that was linked at the bottom of the webinar email. It was also linked at the last newsletter. And so that is just getting at what is the best way to communicate for staff, what are you interested in, that sort of thing. So if you could complete that, that would be awesome. We're continuing on training, communication, trying to strengthen our partnership at the local level, and that's really getting at the regional groups in the proposal that's going to go out, so that we can make sure that that's being successful across the state. Continuing to look at the tactical basin planning process and our efforts to achieve our goals within the partnership and the TMDL for Lake Champlain and Lake Benthamagog and Long Island Sound, and making sure that we're collaborating, and then also targeting our research and our funds so that we can have the answers we need and the best results possible. And then also the Science Advisory Committee. So this was a big ticket item for our strategic plan, was the establishment of a Science Advisory Committee, which would include all of our partners and be very much focused on what is the current literature and data showing that relates to Vermont and Vermont agricultural land use and the practices that we're using to reach the TMDL, and making sure that we are funding what's going to be best so we can achieve our goals. And so the Science Advisory Committee met about a month ago for the first time. They convened and are moving forward, continuing to meet twice a year and doing a bunch of work in between. So that's really great and exciting. All right, so this is the end. Sorry that we went over. And are there any questions, or are there areas where you could use more information where I might be able to send you something?
That was so helpful. Thank you. I think all the resources you already mentioned would be very helpful to receive. But other than that, I really like how you went program by program and saw how everyone was interconnected with one another and who was in charge, because you always hear all these names of, go talk to this person or go talk to this person. So seeing like exactly their role and in the partnership was really helpful for me.
Awesome. Yeah, let me just run down that list real quick, just to make sure I have everything. And if there's something that you think you could need that's not on there, let me know. So we have the acronym list, a flow chart of programs, the wetlands map and the related information about Irene's and the success of those projects, the basin planning regions. I'll also send, I mean, I know you guys have the RAPs, but I'm just going to make a packet for new employees. The RAPs, you'll be getting an email from Kathy Yando with UVM about access to SharePoint. It's 2 emails. So you'll get like one that's a welcome email, and then a second one that you actually have to click and do all the stuff. Are there other resources that might be helpful?
I don't think so. I think that covers pretty much all of them.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for staying longer. I really appreciate it. And I'll put this stuff together and send it your way. Oh, also, of course, send the partnership strategic plan. Oh, yeah. And also I'll send you the 2019 annual report, because that has a bunch of great stats that are applicable for all of Vermont and like what we achieved in 2019, which will probably be helpful to you in your work. So I'll do that as well.
Thank you so much for setting this up.
Sure. Well, thanks for coming, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.
You as well.
Thanks. Bye.